My name is Paul Kaplan, and this is the first talk in our series on the Judeo-Christian resurgence. All of our talks are intended for both Jews and Christians because both faiths are currently floundering between the old era and the coming new age. The Christian religion arose because of the Jewish failure to honor the covenant of the Ten Commandments and the vow we made at Mount Sinai. And although we Jews managed to keep this vow for 1300 years, a number of corrupt rabbis eventually replaced the covenant with a huge set of their own inferior writings, which became known as the Talmud. The Talmud. So when Israel was occupied by the Romans in 63 BC, the same corrupt rabbis known as the Pharisees persuaded the Romans that a huge Talmud education industry could be created around the Talmud. They explained to the Romans that such an industry could generate enormous amounts of money. And neither the rabbis nor the Romans were in the least concerned that the Talmud would completely swamp the bedrock values of the covenant. Well, the Romans did indeed go along with the proposal, and they did indeed help the rabbis to build the Talmud industry, which was enormously successful, and it survives to this day. So the rabbis mingled the huge Talmud with the bedrock values of the covenant, and what happened? The bedrock values soon disappeared under the huge rabbinical sea of rubbish, where they remain submerged to this day. Fortunately, the Bible is adamant that the sea will one day give up its dead. I believe this line comes from the book of Revelation. Naturally, a great many people were horrified when the Talmud began to drown the spirit of the Ten Commandments, and a large part of the nation arose in revolt against this thing which was called the abomination of desolation. Wise people could see that the Talmud would certainly cause the ultimate catastrophe for Israel, which was the dreaded breach of the covenant. And the most effective of the devout people who fought against the Talmud was an extremely passionate and dedicated young man by the name of Jesus. He was one of the bravest and noblest gentlemen ever seen in Israel, and he did everything humanly possible, including sacrificing his life, to prevent the Talmud from destroying the covenant. And as we know, the Pharisees eventually made elaborate arrangements for the Romans to murder him. But before the murder, the Romans had been much impressed by Jesus. And by this time they had become experienced in using religion for financial gain. They'd been working with the rabbis for a long time, and they knew how to make money from religion. They realized that his personality and his oratory could be used to create an entirely new religion among the Gentiles. And this new religion would be 100 times the size of Judaism. And the possibilities were astounding. Now, Jesus knew what the Romans had in mind, and he realized that the new religion would be extremely successful. But he also knew that his own Jewish people would never accept the idea that he was the Son of God, and would reject with contempt the idea of worshipping him as divine. So the Jews would therefore become a never-ending nuisance to the huge new Roman religion, which would infuriate the leaders of the religion, and as a result the Jews would suffer endless torment from the mighty religion, which would be 100 times the size of Judaism. And this tribulation would be more terrible than anything ever seen before, or anything that would ever be seen again. And Jesus realized that the only thing that would stop the misery and tribulation of the Jews was the eventual collapse of the Roman religion, which was inevitable because it contained too many Roman superstitions and weaknesses to last forever. And Jesus could see that after a very long time, the Roman religion, which had become known as Christianity, would eventually be ridiculed as archaic nonsense and would collapse. It would collapse altogether. And as Jesus put it, the days of the Gentiles would be fulfilled. But unfortunately, the collapse of Christianity would threaten to bring down the whole Western world, which is precisely the crisis we are facing today. However, Jesus could also see how the Western world could extricate itself from this predicament. He saw that shortly after the worst of the Jewish tribulation, which could be the Nazi Holocaust, a small number of Jews would realize that their centuries of misery and tribulation had been caused by the Pharisees and their Talmud. And they would see that this abomination remained the central cause of all the hatred of the Jewish people, which would still persist at the time. So Jesus also realized that when the evil of the rabbinate and their Talmud had been understood, it would cause an enormous confrontation between the people and the rabbis of fury and intensity never before seen in human history. And it is also clear to Jesus that if the Jews continued to allow themselves to be misdirected by the rabbis and their Talmud, then not one Jew would be left alive. That comes from Matthew 24. So we are now in the very situation foreseen by Jesus 2,000 years ago. And we are certainly entering the period known to Christians as the Second Coming. Now, the Second Coming will start when the Jews come to understand that Jesus fought and died to ensure that the Jewish people finally realized that their trusted rabbinate and their Talmud had always concealed the bedrock values and had always kept the nation on its knees by depriving it of its bedrock moral foundation. And when the Jews realized this, we will also realize that Jesus was the one who had sacrificed everything to make our recovery possible. And we'll also realize why our rabbinate has always presented Jesus to the Jewish people in the worst possible light. Meanwhile, millions of Christians are awaiting some movement amongst the Jews, especially those Christians who are extremely distressed by the collapse of their ancient Roman faith, the general collapse of moral fiber, and the miserable failure of their own clergy to do anything about it. And when these Christians see the figure of Jesus restored to a place of honor among the Jews, and when they see him assume a central place in the confrontation with the rabbinate, they will recognize that the Second Coming is underway, and they will know that their centuries of faith have not been in vain. And when all this takes place, an invincible Judeo-Christian alliance will arise, and the rabbinate and their Talmud will be swept away as in the time of Noah. Matthew 24. Now, after the destruction of the Talmud and the rabbinate, a new covenant will be set up. It will take us a few years to do it. And when these things have been done, Jews and Christians will at last stand together before God. And then we'll deal with the leftist sons of Belial. Now, if you generally agree with this video, then you'll also agree that this viewpoint must be made known as widely as possible. And the enormous power of the internet can and should be harnessed by godly people. And if we do so, the leftists won't be able to do anything about it at all. However, internet publicity costs money. And if ever there was a case for crowdfunding, it's here and now. So your financial contributions to our Patreon site, however small, can form a huge river that can move people to action all over the world. You may also want to read our book, God versus the Left, which provides the broad biblical picture of where we are and where we need to go. And this book is available from Amazon. Finally, your comments and suggestions are just as essential as your financial contributions and will be most welcome here and on our Patreon and Facebook sites. No one can handle something of the magnitude of the second coming without the help of millions of decent people. And please don't forget to click on the subscribe button, because there will be no shortage of people trying to get these videos banned, and we may have to resort to email to get these videos to you. So this is Paul Kaplan signing out and advising you that we'll be releasing new videos at approximately 1 per week. So until then, thank you for your time and attention.